Welcome and thanks for joining us today. And I would just like to remind everyone joining to click the mute button in the bottom left corner, just so there aren't any noises coming from your room. And we'll be here for a few moments as people trickle into our meeting, but thanks for responding to the call to be with us here today. And we're really excited to see you. We think it'll be a very informative and inspiring session and help each of you find your way within the Poor People's Campaign to a really meaningful experience. Just a couple practical items. We are going to be recording this session. So when we're here together in the main group, we'll be recording this session. We will have some breakout groups later, and those will not be recorded. But if you would not like to be recorded, just click the stop video button in the bottom left, and that way your image will not be recorded. And we're going to start with a song as a few more folks are arriving, and then we will continue.
Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody's got a right to live.
I feel this melody in the footsteps of the people, rising up in the rhythm of dignity and courage. When I see you, I suddenly believe liberation can flourish, and generosity and humility will save us. And we will use the love our mamas gave us to decolonize the skies above us with praises. Learning from the bravest, the beautiful, nameless creators of a world newly awakened. We on fire and blazing our way out the matrix, guided by a single mother's hand, holding her family together. We already on the other side of never. We're the aunties brewing tea and sipping sweetness from the south to the north. We are here to remind those in D.C. who they working for. That's right, beloved. This song is Freedom Uncovered.
Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody has got a right. Everybody's got a right to live.
What Harriet walked towards, what the people in Selma marched for, what the riots from Stonewall to Ferguson to Minneapolis fought for. A movement of people who pour in dollars but rich in brilliance. We are the millions, the healers who come to heal, the leaders who come to reveal that the right to live means you've had the right to feel what you feel. The right to live means an end to police violence and the passage of a Green New Deal. The right to live is in the wind, and every day we witness in our children's countless talents. The right to live is harmonizing in the voice of Yara Allen. It is the springtime and you can feel the right to live about to bloom, growing out the organizing of comrades like Sierra and Sharon and Claudia de la Cruz. Esto es el momento de pararnos como madres orgullosas y sonreír, porque no hay nada más esencial que el derecho de vivir. The right to live is a simple truth to return us to ourselves. It is a spell being cast upon a lost and divided nation to heal the wounds of hate and incarceration with a love so bold it includes everybody. Feel that, everybody. And when you fight for those rights, they become the lights for us to follow through these long, dark nights. This is a promise to be radically honest and declare we are worthy of food to eat and housing to sleep in and schools to dream in and just being human beings. We are worthy of love. And so the Poor People's Campaign has come to bring our freedom into being. You will know we've arrived because you will hear us sing.
Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live.
Okay, so that was our housekeeping up front. Thanks for your patience on that. And now we're going to begin a presentation to provide some more information on the history of the Poor People's Campaign, the current campaign, how it formed, some of its structure at a national level, as well as a local level, and then also some of the actions that we're taking here and how you can get involved. So again, welcome to the California Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. This is an incredibly rich topic, introductory meeting. It certainly helped me feel grounded here as a newcomer in the campaign. And we're going to start by providing some background on the 1968 campaign. In 1960, oh, I'm sorry, Nancy, if you could go back to the, yeah, there we go. In 1967 and 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., other civil rights leaders, and others came together to forge a campaign to bring national attention to the unjust economic conditions facing millions of people worldwide. In November 1967, Dr. King announced the Poor People's Campaign to challenge economic inequality, militarism, and poverty. He articulated a clear formula of how the poor can claim the power that resides within our communities and to create a, quote, new and unsettling force. His vision emphasized the importance of respect for poor people and the need for poor Blacks, whites, Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans to unite. On December 2017, the 50th anniversary of the announcement of the first Poor People's Campaign, a diverse leadership came together in Washington, D.C. to launch the new Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Co-chaired by Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II of Repairers of the Breach and Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris of the Kairos Center, with the support of many organizations, denominations, and individuals, now in 45 states across the country. The campaign launched with two primary goals. One was to change the narrative by changing the narrator. That means putting more focus on who and why people are poor and amplifying the voices of those who are most impacted by the systemic forces that keep people in poverty. The second goal was to build power to change policy through it. Unfortunately, the unity and organization needed for the Poor People's Campaign of 1968 to complete all three of the planned stages and form this new and unsettling force capable of disrupting the complacent national life and achieving an economic Bill of Rights was not easy to come by. The assassinations of Dr. King and Senator Robert Kennedy, a key proponent of the campaign and a presidential candidate, served to cripple the campaign and greatly limit its impact. Midway through the campaign, Robert Kennedy, whose wife attended the Mother's Day opening of Resurrection City, was assassinated. Out of respect for the campaign, his funeral procession passed through Resurrection City. The Department of the Interior forced Resurrection City to close on the 24th of June in 1968 after the permit to use parkland expired.
Next, an effort to revive a famous movement of the 1960s focused on reducing poverty, inequality, and tackling social justice. But with such a broad agenda, will it find enough support at this polarized time? We start with a look at the campaign that began 50 years ago. Shortly before his death in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. expanded his civil rights campaign to include calls for economic justice. He called for an economic revolution that included protection and services for the poorest Americans. He would call it the Poor People's Campaign.
We are coming to get our check.
The campaign would bring together poor people from across the country and from across racial, ethnic, and geographic lines, including poor whites, for a march on Washington.
Even if you have to bring a whole family, we are going to have in Washington facilities, and we're going to have food, and we are going to demand that the government do something about these conditions.
The first step was to construct a shanty town called Resurrection City on the National Mall, housing thousands of participants in a form of nonviolent civil disobedience. Dr. King himself would never make it to the March on Washington. He died that spring. But weeks after his assassination, 50,000 people gathered in solidarity, demanding economic reform on the steps where Dr. King had professed, "I have a dream."
We come with an appeal to open the doors of America to the almost 50 million Americans who have not been given a fair share of America's wealth and opportunity.
Half a century later, a group of religious and moral leaders are planning a wave of civil disobedience in Washington, a revival of the Poor People's Campaign. It is headed in part by the Reverend William Barber, who's the co-chair of the campaign. He led demonstrators at a rally in front of the U.S. Capitol this month, and he was arrested, alongside the Reverend Jesse Jackson, a key figure in the 1968 movement. I spoke with Reverend Barber recently when he was in Washington. Reverend William Barber, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you very much for joining us. When the original Poor People's Campaign took place, it was 50 years ago. Dr. Martin Luther King was involved. After he was assassinated, it continued. But what is the connection between then and now?
Well, thank you so much for having us. And on behalf of the campaign, the National Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival, and my co-chair, Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, let me say that the connection was, first of all, that it did continue, that people realized Dr. King was right. Racism, poverty, and militarism were interconnected. The connection today is we did a study, we commissioned a study with the Institute for Policy Studies and also had some help with Urban Institute, anecdotal and empirical data. And we did something called the Souls of Poor Folk, auditing America 50 years after the Poor People's Campaign. What did we find? Today, there are 140 million poor and low wealth people. Today, there are 250,000 people that die every year from low wealth. We have less voting rights today because of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act than we had in 1965. We have 62 million people who are working poor, who work for less than a living wage, and 14 million children who are in poverty.
Those numbers are overwhelming. They are daunting. You're not proposing to do away with poverty, are you?
We are saying that there are 5 interlocking injustices that America has to face because they continue to cause policy violence. That is systemic racism, particularly seen through the lens of voter suppression, where people use voter suppression to get elected, and then once they get elected, they pass policies that hurt the poor, mostly white women, children, and the working poor. Systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy and militarism, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism that says you don't have to address those issues. We are saying, yes, America is going to have to face these 5 interlocking injustices and change them.
Why can't you work through the existing political system, work to elect political figures who agree with your agenda?
Well, several reasons. Number one, we had 26 presidential debates in the last presidential election. On the Democrat and Republican side, not 1 hour was spent on poverty. Not 1 hour was spent on voter suppression and restoring the Voting Rights Act. Not 1 hour on the war economy and militarism. So if we're not even having the conversation, the first thing we have to change is the attention violence. We have an attention right when it comes to poverty and the poor, and we must change that before you can change the agenda. And it must be a movement of the people from the bottom up.
Reverend Barber, I talk to people, I've read folks who agree with much of what you are saying you want, but they also are saying you're asking for too many different things, that you should narrow your list of ambitions, that you'll have a much better chance at getting something done.
Well, then those same people should say narrow the Constitution, because it's pretty ambitious. It says domestic tranquility, establishment of justice, providing for the common defense, promoting the welfare, general welfare. Narrow the moral call of the Bible that says you're supposed to care for the stranger, the hungry, the sick, the left out, the lonely, the imprisoned. Why is it that that wealthy and greed gets to ask for everything? They want tax cuts, they get that. They want to block health care, they get that. But then we tell poor people, you have to ask for one thing. 37 million people without health care, we have to fight for health care. Millions of people without living wages, we can't just ask for one thing, because they are systemically interlocking injustices.
If there are so many who you define as poor in this country, why aren't we seeing more people rise up and make this argument? I mean, it's right now it's left to you and a relatively small group of people who are making this argument, having the march, having your demonstrations and so forth.
Well, I don't know if I would say a relatively small group. We have organizing committees in 40 states. We have people who are organizing. In the last 2 weeks, we've had thousands of people attend. Over nearly 2,000 people do civil disobedience, more than ever in the history of this country, simultaneously doing nonviolent moral fusion, civil disobedience. There is a rising, and why? And so what we're doing is we're launching a movement. We're not ending a movement. We're launching a movement and calling people to action. Many people do not know how bad it is, and many people who are poor and low wealth have been broken and pushed down and ignored. But where we're going from West Virginia to Wisconsin, from Alabama to Alaska, we're finding that there are thousands of people who are saying it's time for us to stand up and refuse to be silent.
You've said that the nation's problem is not that we don't have enough money. You said it's that we don't have the moral capacity to face what ails society. What did you mean by that?
That when you look at our deepest moral framework of the Constitution and our deepest moral values of our religious tradition, we too often have a political conversation that talks about left versus right, military or middle class. That's too puny, it's too narrow. 43.5% of this country is poor and low wealth. People are dying. Even Joseph Stiglitz, the economist, says that America has to face the cost of inequality. What I'm saying is we can't just have a left-right argument anymore. We need to have a deeply moral argument that says this is not just about Democrats or Republicans. This is about America. What kind of democracy do we want to be? You cannot have a democracy continue to exist when 400 people make an average of $97,000 an hour and you lock people up who simply want 15 in the union.
Does either political party come closer to your goals?
Well, I think they can. I think they hit at it. I think, of course, the extremists who have taken over the Republican Party have just gone so far extreme. You know, they're more focused on tax cuts to the wealthy. They want to blame poor people for their problems. Democrats, on the other hand, are willing to talk about, say, the Affordable Care Act and talk about the middle class. But the reality is neither party is willing to put right in front of America the issues of systemic racism, of systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and say the word poverty. It's almost as though we've tried to remove even saying the word poverty, when in fact the majority of the poor people in this country are white, women, children, working people, and the disabled. So we have to change our narrative in this country. And the only way you can change the narrative is to change the narrator. That's why this campaign is focused on three things: breaking through the narrative, massive voter mobilization among the poor, and power building from the bottom up.
Reverend William Barber, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign in 2018. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Says impact of the 1968 campaign. There we go. Thanks, Nancy. So yeah, in the face of setbacks due to political violence and assassinations, as well as difficulties sustaining national movement, the Poor People's Campaign of 1968 still had an impact, not only on governmental policies, but also on public perceptions. The campaign pushed Congress and federal agencies to allocate millions for programs such as Head Start and education welfare services for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, while it also helped catalyze the desegregation of schools and extension of labor programs. Significantly, the campaign introduced new strategies for protest and social change. The movement also helped transform national discussions on race, class, economic opportunities, security, and democracy. So now I want to invite Peg to come on and share a little bit about the modern Poor People's Campaign.
Thanks, Mason. The new Poor People's Campaign is building on the idea of fusion movements that have brought progressive change throughout history. The modern Poor People's Campaign is a movement, not a moment. It's a national call for moral revival. It's an organism, not an organization. It lifts from the bottom. It confronts the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. It is a fusion movement. What does a fusion movement mean? It means recognizing the centrality of race, building a broad, diverse coalition, intentionally diversifying the movement, engaging in indigenously led grassroots organizing, committing to nonviolent action, and resisting the one movement mentality. We are building a movement. In this slide, you'll see the condensed version of the 12 fundamental principles of the Poor People's Campaign, which guide our work. We read the full principles at many local meetings to ground ourselves in the work. They are worth time studying if you want to get involved. And again, you can find the full description of the principles at the Poor People's Campaign website, as well as through links on information you'll receive at the end of this meeting. Also, please note the last principle on the list, embrace nonviolence, because it is particularly important for folks considering joining the campaign as a volunteer. Violent tactics or actions won't be tolerated, period. You'll be asked to sign a covenant of nonviolence as part of the California Poor People's Campaign if you engage in any direct action events, such as sitting in at the Capitol in Sacramento. The covenant of nonviolence is far more than a document to sign when engaging in direct action. It is an ideal woven through all the principles of the campaign, especially because others may try to disrupt and weaken the nonviolence foundation of our work. Given the US population is estimated at slightly higher than 300 million, the fact that 140 million of our people are poor or low income means that more than 40% of the population lives in poverty. These statistics are pre-COVID and do not include the estimated 8 million who have fallen into poverty as a result of the pandemic. These statistics are drawn from the supplemental poverty measure, an alternative approach to assessing poverty that differs from the official poverty measure, which is limited and outdated. When the official poverty measure is quoted publicly, it often does not reflect the full scale of poverty in the country. You can read more about how poverty is measured in the campaign's moral budget from the website. Part of grassroots organizing is to go out, listen, and engage with people most affected by the policies that keep poor people down. The Poor People's Campaign has taken to bus tours to engage with their supporters and form state organizing committees. The campaign's early tours brought together those drawn from all segments of the Fusion movement. The 2019 tour highlighted the voices of the poor in hearings on homelessness, mass incarceration, and the criminalization of poverty. During the election year of 2020, the campaign led the mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educated tour, known as the MORE, MORE tour, to not only register voters, but to mobilize new and existing campaign supporters to commit to its aims and principles. The national tour kicked off in June 2019 and was meant to be ongoing until May 2020. Our wonderful December 2019 tour stop in San Francisco was one of the last live events. Subsequently, 4 states had their tour stops canceled. But soon the campaign took to Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Zoom. Recordings of the Facebook Live feeds are available on the National Campaign's Facebook page. The video you'll see next is from the 2019 Truth and Poverty bus tour from Repairs of the Breach.
What happens in Wall Street often doesn't say a thing about what's happening on the real streets of America.
Well, there are thousands who are not free. Yeah. And we know when one person is not free, none of us are free. Yeah. And we know that this isn't the case in God's economy. That's right. It doesn't have to be this way. That's right. That's right. We can do better. Yeah.
We can do better. Yeah. We can do better.
In America, we are taught that if you are poor, if you are homeless, if you are dispossessed, disenfranchised, it's because you've done something wrong. It's because you are inferior. It is because you are insufficient. And we believe that that is wrong. There are 140 million people in the United States who either live in poverty or are low income, who are one paycheck away from being homeless, or one wildfire away from being homeless, or one missed rent check or car payment away from being homeless. That's over a third of the United States. Now, to me, that is our deep shame as a country. That is a moral emergency, and that's why we need a Poor People's Campaign across the entire nation. We are identifying ourselves with this movement. And what that means is we're saying, hey, we're part of something bigger.
I understand some things about poverty because I am a poor person. We believe that when poor people name their own priorities because they know their own needs and know what needs to happen, that real change will be produced. If poor people are not allowed to speak these priorities for themselves, no one else will.
It's hard enough just to live on this earth and survive. And they shouldn't make it any more difficult. You shouldn't be homeless and be a criminal just because you're homeless. That's right. It's sad. Sad.
The homelessness that you're seeing in the streets of LA, in our community, you can see it all up and down the state. People encamped in the streets, living in their cars, in RVs, in garages. It's a growing phenomenon. And one thing that's important for me to point out, I don't think this is because people just don't know how to manage their finances. This is an economic devastation based on a systemic root.
We thought we were going off to be heroes. But what we found was that we are no more than pawns. And when we come home to live in an unjust and unequal society with the largest prison complex in the world and a political system that seeks to oppress voting rather than to expand it.
It's got to be done to help people with disabilities to vote. One of my concerns is when I went to vote, when the little sheet came out of the thing that showed what I voted for, I couldn't read it. It was in small print.
Let the people vote! That's how you honor veterans.
I get tired of hearing a certain false narrative. And it's that people like myself are weak, lazy, and immoral. But this is far from the truth, because weak, lazy, and immoral is letting human beings live in the streets while billionaires receive trillion-dollar tax cuts.
Come on now. Come on now.
Denying health care to millions, cutting social services for the poor, and privatizing the VA while dropping bombs on brown people 1,000 miles away, diverting money from poor Americans to pay for those bombs and lying for the reasons why the bombs are even being dropped, caging immigrant children,
Come on, Mike.
ignoring ecological devastation in poor communities is weak, lazy, and immoral.
This was the site of the first of the 3 major fires that Lewiston experienced in 2013. They were all arson, and there was a lot of agreement that the fires themselves were tragic, but it surfaced this ongoing tension that we have in the community over, who we consider to be a part of our community. And many times it's not even coded. It's literally, we have too many immigrants, their homes burnt down, so let's not rebuild them because, we need less people like that here.
Look at everything the United States is doing. Look at all the wealth. That's all ours. I mean, that's all the Native American. It's easy to lose that focus because everybody came in that second chapter. But they got to go to the first chapter. The first chapter is going to tell the story of this country. And then Congress or nobody can turn away from it. So, this Poor People's Campaign needs to know that they have artillery, religious artillery that can help the movement. But if you don't recognize us, then it goes back to that second chapter that we're the forgotten ones.
There are currently more than 11,000 unaccompanied children in the care of the U.S. and Humane Services. This policy is inhumane, it is immoral. To remain silent is to be complicit.
There is no individual solution to the social and economic problems that working women face.
We do not live in a mom-friendly or child-friendly country. We face inadequate paid paternity leave, abysmal postpartum health care, and equally appalling access to quality child care and public education. I feel expendable, and if I am expendable, so too are children, and that I cannot stand for.
So we have to hold these politicians accountable. That's where our problem is. In St. John, people are not participating in these elections because these people who we elect, they are not representing us.
There's other systems here that are oppressing us that voting won't always fix, and that we've got to talk about, we've got to call it out, and we've got to mobilize and build a movement to be able to change these things that our politicians won't always change.
But I have to tell you, there's something going on in this nation right now. There's a beautiful birth of a movement, and it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us to stand up and say, I lived at a time when kids were going hungry and homeless, when they were closing hospitals and healthcare centers, when racists were emboldened. But I linked arms with people. I stood up and acted for justice, and we changed it. We changed it.
Forward together! Not one step back.
It's movement time. It's time to shake this nation because this nation is locked up. Our politics are small and binding, but we are those who can see the cracks in the walls and the way to come out of the cells. And we are determined to be free. And we're determined to see other folk free. Free with living wages. Right? Free. Free with health care. Free. Free with food on their tables, and free with good housing, and free with good water and land and air. And free with justice. That is the call of this movement. And we are the front line.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want?
Bishop Barber emphasizes that we cannot make demands without data. The Poor People's Campaign is undertaken and continues to conduct extensive research to create accurate, current information about poverty in the poor. You'll find links to all of these studies and research documents on the campaign's website. The Souls of Poor Folk Moral Audit provided a data-driven analysis of the historical and empirical realities of poverty in the past 50 years since 1968. In the 7 sections of the moral budget, which was delivered to the Congressional Budget Committee in 2019, we look at policies and investments for 7 critical areas of the poor people's moral agenda: democracy and equal protection under the law, domestic tranquility, peace and the common defense, life and health, the planet, our future, and an equitable economy. In 2020, the campaign produced a report titled Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low-Income Americans. This report's findings support the campaign's analysis that organizing among the poor around an agenda that represents their concerns can fundamentally change the political map of this country and lead to policies that are just and representative for all Americans. Because the Poor People's Campaign is a joint project of Repairs of the Breach and the Kairos Center, the staff from these nonprofits manage the national campaign, coordinating events, policies, and other activities. Reflecting the campaign's commitment to its moral fusion principles, the coordinating committees at the state level include an impacted person, a faith leader, and an organizer. In California, our state committee has an additional member as well. Given California's size, we also have several regional steering committees in addition to the state coordinating committee. They include San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, Inland Empire, Sacramento, Orange County, Northeast San Fernando Valley, and San Diego. Santa Barbara is launching a region this spring. Our work is carried out by statewide and regional working groups. You can use the feedback form to get more information or get connected to statewide or working groups in your region. One tool for building the campaign is our statewide meetings, which everyone's invited to join. We invite you to share your talents and skills. We always need facilitators for the Jubilee study groups and welcome sessions, and tech support for all meetings and events. You don't have to be a lawyer to join the legal working group, which meets bi-monthly. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mason, and he'll bring you up to date on what's been happening in our state.
Great. Thank you, Peg. So now we'll go over some of the actions of the California Poor People's Campaign and some of the things that you might become involved in as you continue. So people from all over California submitted pictures of themselves holding individual letters to spell out the phrase, "Everybody's got a right to live," a declaration that is a core message of the campaign, as well as the chorus of one of our songs, which you heard today and is sung at our rallies and gatherings. You may be asked at some point to submit a photo with a letter to help with our messaging. Seeing many people's faces supporting our messages has a special magic, as you can see here. Over 20,000 door hangers with census and voter information were distributed across California by volunteers with the Poor People's Campaign, including those shown here in Vacaville, Sacramento, and San Jose. The false narrative of religious nationalism is a phrase that you may hear us use from time to time, and it's one of the 5 interlocking evils that the Poor People's Campaign is committed to eradicating. When Christian nationalist Sean Foyt proposed the large-scale worship protest event without requiring participants to wear masks or maintain social distance, the California Poor People's Campaign swung into action to support the Los Angeles Poor People's Group and to demand that the Los Angeles mayor and board of supervisors, as well as Governor Newsom, take legal steps to prevent the gathering. Besides hosting a Facebook Live meeting attended by some of the 60-plus faith leaders to protest Foyt's actions, the campaign supported a car caravan blockade organized by Church Without Walls and the LA Can Group, where 100 cars blocked the gathering. Another example is our Moral Monday broadcast. Some of you may have already joined some of those. On March 15th, in more than 30 states, we had demand deliveries of the 14 policy priorities to the capitals. So here in California, we drove to Sacramento, read the 14 points on the Capitol Mall, and then delivered them to the state legislature. The California Poor People's Campaign of Sacramento participated in a die-in with the Sacramento Services Not Sweeps Coalition, holding local officials accountable for the deaths of our unhoused neighbors during 2020 and up to present. And addressing the local rent strike, Kenya Alcocer of the California Poor People's Campaign of Los Angeles said, "We were already fighting for an eviction moratorium before the COVID crisis, and now we're seeing that was possible during this crisis. If banks are getting bailed out and corporations are getting bailed out, why aren't poor people getting bailed out through this process as well?" she said. Kenya now serves as tri-chair of the National Steering Committee. The San Francisco Bay Area Art Theomusicology Working Group, in collaboration with the Cardboard and Concrete Collective of the Village and Feed the People, put this mural down in front of Oakland City Hall to demand upgrades, not evictions, and pathways to housing for our unhoused neighbors. Finally, we are 100 days into our 500 Days of Fighting Forward plan. Moral Mondays will resume on May 24th, when we'll launch the We Can't Be Silent Anymore congressional resolution to end poverty and press our congressional representative to sign on, enact a moral budget. On June 21st, we'll have another digital mass Poor People's and Low-Wage Workers Assembly. In the run-up to the 2022 elections, we'll be focusing on key Senate races. And on June 18th, 2022, we'll be in person for a mass Poor People's and Low-Wage Workers Assembly in Washington, D.C. And now I will turn it back to Peg for some information on how you can join us going forward.
Great. Thanks, Mason. So you can visit poorpeoplescampaign.org and check out the Take Action section, where you'll find an ever-changing array of actions and policy documents. I want to highlight the COVID-19 and Poverty Memorial Wall. It's at memorial.poorpeoplescampaign.org. The impact of COVID has been devastating, disproportionately impacting poor and low-income people. If you've lost loved ones to COVID and/or poverty, please consider adding their name and photo to our virtual memorial wall. You can follow us on Twitter. The links are in the chat. You can find us on Facebook. Once again, the links are in the chat. We always appreciate donations of any amount. We'll drop in the chat the information to donate online or through our fiscal sponsor, ETINA. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mason, who's going to set up the breakout rooms.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you for being so patient and courteous during our presentation. We would like to set up these breakout groups, as I mentioned in the beginning, by region. So for those of us who were joining a little later, you'll notice that many of us have edited the way our name displays. If you hover over your image in Zoom, you'll see that your name is there and you can edit that. So the top right corner, you'll see 3 dots. Clicking on that, you're able to click rename. And you'll see in the chat there are different initials associated with the region of California where you live. So please quickly edit that name to reflect your region. And then we will take about 20 minutes to meet in small groups. Let's start by introducing ourselves, just saying hello, stating our names, pronouns, location, and just take a minute to share a thought or a reflection or, a question that arose for you during this presentation. Just articulating, why you were moved to be here and maybe some ideas you have for next steps. And then we'll come back after the breakout groups and take some Q&A with everybody. Hope you enjoyed connecting with each other. I know I'm very excited to be connecting in person with other Bay Area folks as soon as possible. So hopefully it helps to just meet some other people in your region or near you. There's obviously a lot we can do on the ground in person. So now we want to take a chance to do some Q&A and just field some questions from everybody. So many of you are probably familiar with Zoom and know how to raise your hand, but for those of you who aren't, there is a button, a couple ways to do it actually. There's the reactions button in the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, you'll see a raise hand button. You can also, I believe, do it from the participants section. Or you could just go back to the chat and type in a question into the chat and we'll take a look at those questions as well. But yeah, we're just curious, even if it's a reflection or something that came up in your conversation that you'd like to share with everybody, would love to hear what's top of mind or top of heart for everybody. Looks like Corey is raising his hand. So Corey, why don't you unmute yourself?
One interesting question that came up in our group was to get more information about what the various working groups within California's Poor People's Campaign are doing, so that people can understand a little bit more fully about how they might plug in and what the basic activity structure is of the campaign at the present moment, knowing that it's growing and changing.
Thank you, Corey. It's a great question. Would anyone on our team like to share more about the working groups?
What I would suggest is that the feedback form, that you fill that out, because you can then get information about the various working groups and what their focus is and who the contact people are. So rather than try to go through that here, I would suggest people fill out the feedback form, and we will provide you with that information.
Yeah, thanks. Now, there are several working groups and a lot of information there. So we do respond to everybody who submits that form, and we'd love to share a bit more info. I know one of the working groups is actually responsible for creating these welcome sessions and putting together the programming. So some of us that are here today are part of a working group and are, we're getting better at designing a welcome session that is helpful for everybody.
Mason, and just to underline what Nell just said, the feedback form is the best way for us to stay in touch with you. That's another area we're working on to try to keep people connected. So we may not get back to you immediately, but if you do fill out the feedback form, then we at least have your information and we can eventually follow up with you. So I would encourage you to do that today.
And if you don't have immediate clarity on how you would like to be involved in Poor People's Campaign, that's completely normal and was the case with me as well. So yeah, we would just encourage you to attend the next meeting and start to feel that out a little bit further. Okay, it looks like we have another question from the Central Coast. Karen?
Yeah, thanks. I asked this in the small group too, but I'd love to hear other voices as well, about how much local flexibility, or how much flexibility each group has to focus on local issues versus maybe statewide pushes that are happening. Yeah, because I'm in Santa Barbara, and so we're excited to have a group, but a lot of questions I'm getting are, does this mean that we're just focusing on Sacramento all the time, or what does this look like? Can we focus on local things as well? So I'd love to hear more about that.
Thank you. That's a great question.
Mhm.
Maybe one of our leaders.
It is a great
sorry,
question.
no, go ahead.
I'm happy to start, and then others can chime in. So it's a balancing act, because we have initiatives from national that we are focused on. We're organizing, a state campaign that's related to a national campaign. So there's national initiatives, and then we're organizing from the top of the state to the bottom of the state. And so there are statewide initiatives. But it's critical that people are working on the ground in their location, because that's how people get to know about the campaign, is that when you show up in your PPC campaign t-shirt and you say, okay, I'm here and I'm ready to work, whatever the work is, whether it is eviction defense, or it is feeding people who are hungry, or pressing your city council to house the unhoused, or to stop the sweeps, or whatever it is, then that way people get to know that you are there and understand what the values and the principles and the goals and the work is, and who's doing it in their community. And so we encourage people to get involved, because that's the power of the campaign. And so when you are going into work, doing the work in your community, part of what you have to offer is that there are 45 states in the national campaign, and that the issues that the 140 million people are facing across the country are the same, basically. I mean, there's no campaign, no state campaign that doesn't have some focus on housing people who are unhoused, healthcare, minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage to $15. Those are issues that are impacting all of us across the country. And so, connecting people in the local communities is definitely important to do. And welcome. Are you connected to Matt? Matt Lowe?
I am. I just got out of a meeting with him right before this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Welcome. Glad you're here. Are you on mute?
So is there a schedule, like, to connect with people locally? Had a great conversation with Nell. But is there a place to hear what the local committees are doing? Is there a regional meeting that happens?
Beth, I'll answer that question because I had the same question in the breakout room that I was in. Yes, each region has a regional meeting, and the one in the Bay Area happens to be this Saturday from 3 to 5 in the afternoon. And we're called the Poor People's Campaign Bay Area Steering Committee. So that's an opportunity for you to hear what's going on internationally, nationally, and in your state and in your region. And as far as I know, Nell, please correct me if I'm wrong, all regional Poor People's campaigns have regional meetings, and ours is once a month. So it's a great place to meet new people.
Great.
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah. So if you submit the feedback form, we'll make sure that you get an invite to that. It's at 3 o'clock on Saturday.
Just in case anyone's interested, the LA one is at 3 o'clock on Sunday this weekend.
So I will now turn it over to Peg for just some final housekeeping items and to close out our meeting.
Great. Well, thank you all for participating. And really special thanks to Nora and Juan, the ASL, being here today with us. If you want to attend another one of these, they're always the first Tuesdays. So the next one is Tuesday, June 1st, same time, 3:30. And Yeah, the feedback form's great. Just fill it out and it'll all get taken care of. So what we're going to do is complete the way we complete in most of our meetings. So you can unmute yourself and it's easy. I say forward together and you say not one step back. Okay, and we do it 3 times. Forward together. Not one step back. Forward together. Not one step back. Forward together. Not one step back. Thanks for being here.
All right.
Thanks so much, everybody. See you soon.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks to the check team, thanks to the interpreters, and thanks to all the participants.
Yes.